So really warm welcome if you're joining us this evening. My name is Jaime Smith. I'm the Director of the Schools Division here at the Anna Freud Centre. I just want to say a warm welcome to everyone who's come along to our seminar this evening, where we're going to be focusing on building a whole school approach to anti-racism. So we have a panel of expert speakers that we're going to hear from, and we're going to be discussing the importance of the impact of racism on mental health, thinking particularly about the impact in schools, on pupils and on school staff. So some time for lots of excellent discussion and also hopefully some really practical ideas and advice of how we can all champion an anti-racist approach in our schools. So this is our programme for the evening. It's how we're going to spend the next hour and a half. We've got 3 expert speakers, and I'm just really delighted to have such a brilliant, experienced expert panel with us this evening. Our first speaker will be the Honourable Stuart Lawrence, who will be talking from his experience as a former teacher, a campaigner, an author and a speaker. We'll then hear from one of my colleagues, Roseanne McCall, who's a therapist here at the Anna Freud Centre and delivers clinical work in schools across London. We'll be hearing about her experiences. And our final speaker will be Wonu Salau, who's an assistant head teacher in St Bonaventure's School, which is a secondary school in East London, and hearing about some of the really practical work that she's been doing in her school around anti-racism. At the end of all of the speakers, we'll have chance for some questions. So we won't take questions after each speaker. We'll save that and have a nice chunk of time for the last half an hour where all of the speakers will come back and we'll have a panel and we can ask questions then. If you've got any questions at any point, please do pop them into the chat in the chat function whenever they come to you. You don't have to wait till the end. You can add them whenever you think of them and we'll collate them at the end and ask as many questions as we can to our speakers. So that's the plan for the evening. So I just wanted to say how this work has come about. So this seminar really ties in with some of the work that we've been doing at the Anna Freud Centre for about the last 6 months, really looking at the impact of racism on the mental health of children and young people. And the starting point for this really was that we sent out a survey and we had responses from 800 young people. And we asked them about their experiences, about their feelings, and about what they thought about the impact of racism on their mental health. And I think a statistic that really stuck with me is that 88% of young people said that racism affected their mental health a great deal. So we wanted to think about what we could do here at the Anna Freud Centre, what we could do to support schools to open up those conversations around racism and the impact on mental health, and what we could do to help schools to champion an anti-racist approach. So our starting point was working with children and young people, and then we wanted to talk to experts in the field. So we spoke to one of our speakers this evening, Stuart Lawrence. We also worked with an expert charity called BLAM UK, which is Black Learning, Achievement and Mental Health UK, who had lots of experience in relation to anti-racism and education. We also spoke to parents and carers, and we talked to teachers and school leaders to find out some best practice that was happening in the field, and also what schools really needed, what would be helpful in useful resources for them. So to date, we've produced a series of 10 free resources. They're available now. You can download them and anyone can access them for free. They cover a whole range of different topics, including how you can support a student that's experienced racism and how you might want to go about, for example, writing an anti-racist policy for your school. So please do check them out. They're really useful and they're free to download and use. Earlier on in the year, we also produced a podcast series, which again was along the themes of mental health and racism. And we talked to a whole range of people. We heard from mental health experts, we spoke to teachers, we heard from parents. Also, some of our speakers, Wonu and Stuart, were on the podcast. So if you enjoy listening to them this evening, please do go back and check out the podcast because they're really interesting. And just really open discussions around what we can do and some of the practical advice and work that's already taking place. And then this week, as a final kind of part of our work around anti-racism, we've launched some free e-learning for education professionals, completely free to access. It builds on all of the work that we've already done with the resources and with the podcast. It's really interactive. There are videos, there are reflective points, there are some interactive questions. Really, really helpful starting point to really build your knowledge and understanding in relation to racism and mental health. And it fits in with our whole school approach, our 5 steps mental health framework of how you can build good mental health across your whole school community. So that gives a bit of information and context about all the work we've been doing at the Anna Freud Centre, and this evening we'll be exploring that further with our expert guests. I'm going to hand over now to our second speaker. So our second speaker this evening is Roseanne McCall. Roseanne is a colleague of mine here at the Anna Freud Centre. Roseanne is a therapist who works in the school's outreach therapy team, delivering clinical work across secondary schools and primary schools in London. Roseanne is a British-born St. Lucian, originally trained as a body psychotherapist and a systemic family therapist. Roseanne has worked in schools with children with special educational needs, and she's also worked in the NHS as an early intervention worker. Roseanne is hugely experienced in working in schools and delivering mental health work. Roseanne, we're really excited to hear from you, and I'm going to hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and welcome everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that?
Not quite yet, Roseanne.
Okay, hold on. I realise I need to do share screen. Okay. Right. Okay, thank you for your patience. Okay, I am, as Jamie has said, a family therapist working in a school outreach service in different schools across London. And when I was invited to participate in this seminar, I started to think, how could I approach from a clinical perspective, thinking about how schools could sort of improve or sort of, change the culture towards a more inclusive and anti-racist culture. And I was thinking about child Q, and I thought, if this young person was referred to me in the school that I was working, how could I work with the school to help to change shift the culture, heal, make radical changes. And I thought about how it's such an emotive subject, thinking about racism, and that it requires within all of us an authentic examination of our personal biases, whatever race, whatever nationality, wherever we come from. Because if we don't pay attention to this, and also to our power and hierarchy and where we are in the system, we can do further damage. And that we have to think about trauma when we think about racism within a school context. Lots of little traumas happen with children, stop and search on the way to school, maybe with a small T. But I was thinking about child Q, and I thought that person's experience recently has resulted in the loss of epistemic trust, which is when you think about the attachment relationship between an adult and a child, and you have that trust, that's gone between the pupil and the school, and that would need repairing. And repairing it would mean work on looking at the attitudes towards Black minoritized students and the community in which schools live in. So I think that when you're working therapeutically, you need to be really sensitive to all the beliefs that we all carry within schools on all different levels in the community. And as a clinician, trying to find ways to navigate all the different beliefs so that respect is offered and accorded across the board. I may have some anecdotal stories to intermingle with this to make it less dry. And becoming an anti-racist school, I think, also requires really robust safeguarding policies, where attention to racism and potential trauma, so that each case you get, where it's not just about risk of harm to self, whether it's emotional, to really think about the context and treat each case individually, but also have at the back of your mind, that racism is also a form of harm, emotional harm. And one of the things that might be useful in thinking about that to school is this idea of some of the principles that might be helpful. And there's a paper that I'm very happy to share at the end, where there are 10 simple principles that explains the difference between small trauma, which could be things like traumatic memories and remembering, and capital trauma, where, you know, life, death, separation. And again, when I think about child Q, that young lady had multiple traumas. And, you know, one of the things is thinking about paying attention to safety, making a list of what's been going on, you know, making sure that there aren't any unresolved issues that young person might have had, and also paying attention as a member of staff to your own responses to what you're hearing, so that you're taking care of yourself as well as the other person. And if you think about where in your schools you might have safe corners, you know, you hear about where is it safe to feel, where in your schools is it to feel safe if you're feeling vulnerable. If you've had someone said a racist comment to you, or they've commented on you which you're feeling uncomfortable, where do you go to feel safe? Is it safe to talk to your teacher? Is it safe to talk to perhaps your head of year, your pastoral director, your subject teacher, your tutor, your class teacher? It's really interesting to know where would you feel safe as a student, and also the importance of managing things sensitively. I remembered working with a boy in a secondary school during the Black Lives Matter period, and this young person, a white boy, had been looking at exploring some what I would call right-wing views with their parent, and they were in an English lesson, and this young boy had refused to do the work because it was about Black Lives Matter. And he was in a predominantly school where the population of African West Indian young people was high, and his friends were all African and West Indian. And his refusal to do this, blatantly announcing it, shocked everybody. And he couldn't quite manage the feelings that it evoked. And we had had a good working relationship, a therapeutic relationship. So he was referred to me to explore the impact that his comments had had on his class, on his peer relationships. And I thought perhaps he had felt shamed. But as a therapist, I couldn't put those words into his mouth. I had to sort of sensitively explore with him and reminding, I'm a Black woman, he's a white boy, his feelings, and giving him space and making him feel safe enough to sort of go into parts of himself where he may have had some unconscious biases. He may have been particularly biased. He may have just aligned himself with his parent at that time and really hadn't given much thought. He had tended to be an impulsive young person where banter tended to get him into trouble. And over a period of time, we worked through, and he was able to see that perhaps he could have managed his views or tempered them in a very different way, but maybe this was the first opportunity he had to share his views and his curiosity outside of the family, but he hadn't realized the impact it would have on his relationships, and it needed time for him to repair those relationships. And he didn't name it as racism, he didn't name it as the fact that he felt shamed, but I had to hold on to those feelings for him, and he never voiced them, and I still probably carry them. So I think it's important when you're in schools and you want to sort of think about, well, what kind of culture do we have? How do we manage diversity and difference? To really think about how do we manage things sensitively. Another example was a young, and I don't want to overrun, so I'm going to rush. A young African boy had noticed that there were some names on the board, and he commented their ethnicity, but instead of having curiosity, everybody kind of panicked about when the word racist came up. And it would have been interesting to explore what that young person might have been thinking, what was going on that day, what were they listening to, but it all got shut down in a panic. Oh my God, you know, we're not a racist school. And it wasn't about that. It was just about trying to help this young person think about what was the reaction, because they tended to call out what were they expecting, what outcome were they hoping for, but it all just got shut down immediately And so not everything gets handled sensitively. Sometimes it's clumsy and it's difficult. I'm just trying to, okay, I've got, it's hard to see my title. So the idea of an anti-racist culture is about just thinking about all the different diverse representations across the culture of the school community, and like in all the resources that's at the Anna Freud, thinking about celebrating, even Stuart has sort of mentioned, you know, like celebrating different cultures in schools, but also just really thinking beyond tokenism and how it's important to really connect with the community that you're in. I've been invited, interestingly, to a school where there's one Black person in the whole school, a white head, and was saying that there's not enough professional Black representatives for these young people to feel that there are role models. Now, I haven't been to this school yet, but I'm really curious about the experience of the single white person in an all Black school with a white head, how that must be. But clearly the head is trying to embrace the community that the students live in, try and find appropriate representation, and you know, really sort of support their young people. The other thing that's really interesting when thinking about difference is, like, sometimes we don't notice that maybe on the outside somebody's white, but they may identify with being African, particularly individuals from Sierra Leone. And it's really interesting to be sensitive to how people identify themselves. Certainly amongst the West, I refer to the Caribbean as West Indian, and Indian, Chinese, maybe Hispanic shadism, you know, the internalized form of racism, how that is in schools, you know, when you've got a whole range of individuals where skin tone matters. I was working with a little young person whose family are from Algeria, and they were trying to describe an incident between them and somebody else, and they just went, "Not my skin." And I'm thinking, how am I supposed to identify? How can I ascertain who this person could be? Is it the same as my skin? Is it darker than my skin? Is it lighter than your skin? And this young person, who's Algerian, couldn't really explain. And I'm thinking, we need to explore, when we're thinking about creating an anti-racist culture in school, not only just the understanding that white people might have about racism, but within our own communities, thinking about skin hierarchy and privileges of light skin privileges, and how there are sort of different levels where people look down on each other, and how this can cause friction. And it should find the courage to set up a safe environment where we can explore these difficult topics and have interesting conversations where it's safe to do so. And I suppose in order to do that, you need trust. You need trust to explore difficult conversations about racism with both victims and perpetrators, and to maintain curiosity so you don't shut things down. And also to be able to, as a therapist, when you're in schools, contain anxiety that may be evoked when somebody says something. You want to be able to keep conversation going so that you can lead towards healing. And maybe in some cultures, the narratives may not be supportive of that, and especially around mental health. Lots of people are maybe anti. I had a lady who says she has loads of mental health issues, said, you know, I identify with you because we have the same skin shade. I've not had great relationships with other people and I don't want to talk to them. They don't understand me. And so maybe it puts a lot of pressure on me, or I think I've got an opportunity to engage with this person who clearly has some mental health issues, because suddenly maybe our skin tones match. And also, when I'm thinking, you know, of all the lovely resources that Anna Freud made available to everyone, is also thinking about intergenerational trauma. Maybe the parent had an experience of racism or bullying or mistrust with professionals. This may be passed down through narratives with teachers. Relationships may be fraught, and it's difficult to build trust. So one of the things that I think about when you think about racism and the impact on one's mental health is, if you had a piece of paper, a clean sheet of paper in front of you, and you screwed it up, no matter what you do to that piece of paper, you can never return it to its original state. It will leave a mark, it will leave a scar. And all you can do is iron it out and smooth out those scars, and perhaps reduce the intensity of the pain and the hurt. But it is a similar effect to bullying and on your mental health, which reduces your self-esteem. And maybe in trying to create an anti-racist culture in schools, I wonder maybe how much courage there is for schools to sort of really follow through with the desire to become more sensitive to racism or anti-racist narratives, to actually follow through and not just pay lip service to it, because it's quite a difficult journey to undertake. And one of the things that, you know, radical idea, thinking outside the box, is at the Anna Freud, we offer family groups in schools, which is, you know, it fosters community relationships between school and home and community. You bring the parents in, you work with the parents and school and teachers, and communication is strengthened. Stigmatization about mental health, and perhaps there's more information learned about particular cultural groups. You know, sometimes you think in particular areas, like one of the schools I have in Westminster, predominantly Arabic school, you know, maybe Lebanese, maybe Moroccan, maybe Algerian. And so you get to learn about the different cultures, everybody feels comfortable around you. And therefore, you know, you've got a cohesive school, home, community relationship where trust is built and strengthened. And also maybe representatives from that culture is represented amongst the school staff as well, not just at maybe the dinner lady level, but the teachers, but senior leadership teams. And I will finish with an idea by a family therapist and psychologist called Taiwo Afwape, which is about, where she sort of did a paper just after the George Floyd movement about liberation psychology, which is got its roots in, you know, sort of, oh, I've forgotten his name, bear with me, a few hundred years ago. I've completely gone blank on the sort of leading thing, but it's almost about having the courage to explore your thoughts, talk about them and move on, and maybe looking at your internal and your external views, and some sort of transformation takes place. And this is an interesting paper that if anybody's interested in reading, where you look at, you know, you name oppression and you collect to the collective history of solidarity. So it's not just all about being the victim in some case, but actually having, you know, your strength, your warrior position to bring change forward. I think I've come to the end of my presentation, and if there's any questions at the end, I'll very happily take them. I just finish on one thing, actually, if it's okay. There's an anecdotal story. A black teacher went into a school, and the class was particularly racist. Lots of racist comment to the teacher, and the teacher was thinking, you know, I'm qualified, I've got my degrees, I'm qualified to teach this, I know my topic. Why are the kids being quite difficult? One by one, this teacher invited the students into a meeting to exchange and communicate ideas. And it was like, well, why are you so mean in class? Well, your accent's different. Okay, I'm from another country. I'm qualified, I'm this. One by one, she met each individual student, and slowly the class became less disruptive. They were able to air their views, come to a common understanding, and bit by bit, that class became one of the highest achieving classes in the school, because the teacher didn't shut down, was curious about their views, invited an exchange of information. The students felt safe, more secure, and then was open to learning. And on that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Roseanne. You can stop sharing now. That would be brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Roseanne, lots of questions coming in, questions around building trust in school and also around representation in terms of education and the workforce. So we'll pick some of those up at the end, but thank you very much. That was really interesting. I just want to quickly say again, because I've seen quite a lot in the chat, just to remind people that we absolutely will be sharing everyone's slides. Every speaker will be sharing their slides and a recording of this seminar, and we'll get that out to you within the next 10 days. So that's definitely going to be happening. Right, now I would like to introduce our final speaker. Our final speaker is Wonu Salau. Wonu is an assistant head teacher and curriculum lead for English at an East London secondary school. Wonu is passionate about parity of experience and the transformative power of English. She's contributed significantly to reform in her school, creating a curriculum that is representative, rigorous, and invites students to engage in critical discourse. Wonu has supported us so much at the Anna Freud Centre, being a guest on our podcast and also really helping to shape some of the resources and to make them really practical and useful for education leaders. So Wonu, thank you so much. And I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you. Evening, everybody. Thank you, Jamie. I'm just going to put my slides up and
Wonu, you've gone on mute, so we can't hear you. Maybe try again. Wonu, suddenly we can't hear you. I don't know why. Wonu, I still can't hear you, but I just want to check with colleagues that are from the Anna Freud Centre. It could easily just be me, Wonu. Emma, Sandra.
Hi, Jamie. Hi, Jamie.
Hi.
Wonu, if you wouldn't mind leaving and rejoining the call, we'll try and get you back in a second. And Jamie, maybe we can go to a couple of questions. We'll send some over to you.
Sure. I love technology. Okay, Roseanne and Stuart, can I ask you to join me just so that I'm not on my own? And we can maybe do a couple of questions. Is that okay? Super, thank you. Stuart, we had some questions, you might have seen them come up already, around the use of the N word. And I just wondered if we could open up some discussion around that. So a couple of colleagues have said, is it actually better that we encourage people to use it, we use it more because then it loses its potency and it stops being such a taboo word? And then there was another question around, are there any other influential role models? Are there people speaking out about the use of the N word that we can kind of point our young people to and talk about influential people that are saying this word is not appropriate?
Yeah, so the most influential person that stopped using it that I know of would be Richard Pryor, who's no longer with us. So he was a massive person who would use it, part of his sketches, part of his work, and then he had an epiphany after he went to Africa, and then upon his return back from Africa, he swore that in the rest of his sketches, all the rest of whatever he would do, he would never use the word again. And this comes out of a case when I was asked about the word in a magazine, in a cartoon, a graphic cartoon. So there was a graphic card called Time Crisis, and a gentleman had bought the license for it to re-edit and make it again. And he asked me, is it okay, because it was in the original comic, the N word was there. He says, is it okay to continue to use it? And at first I was like, yeah, because it's contextual. It was what was already there. We need to understand what the times was like back then. But then I also realized that if I said, no, take it out, no one would ever know. Going forward from that point onwards, no one would want to ever know. And therefore, someone might think, oh, they might use the N word in that. Yes, that someone's allowed to think that. but it isn't there in black and white for someone to read and to reaffirm and to use again. You know, and it goes back to even things like how in football stadiums, Tottenham, around the word yid, they're not encouraging the fans to sing it anymore because, again, the connotations were through their Jewish membership. They're saying, no, enough's enough now. We don't want to hear it anymore. So it takes someone, maybe in the modern day era, to stand up and to say, no, we will not use it. But again, I'm happy to be that person. And as I said, I'm around the back parts of doing things. When I do meet people who are of that world, I question and ask them, and we're having discussions and talking around it at the moment.
Really helpful. Thank you, Stuart. Roseanne, did
Nice.
you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that Stuart has, given quite a comprehensive response, but the N word, it's not something I come across in my work. None of the students actually use that in their schools. And so it's not something we get to explore or deconstruct, but it is difficult. It is difficult one. Do you leave it out or do you keep it in? It's a difficult one. Maybe it has to be a choice for everybody just to leave it out, a personal choice. I'm conscious Wonu wants to.
Thanks, Roseanne. Wonu, I'm really hoping that we might have fixed it. Do you want to give it a go?
Hopefully. Can you hear me?
Perfect. I can absolutely hear you. Brilliant. Thank you so much for bearing with us. That was the joys of online seminars. Right, Wonu, I'm going to hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you for your patience. My
Wonu, I'm so sorry, but we still can't hear you. I would say it seems to be linked to you sharing your slides because we can absolutely hear you when your slides are not up. I'm wondering, Anna Freud colleagues, if someone from the centre could share Wonu's slides, if that would help.
Oh.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a look at doing that now, Wonu, just a second.
Wonu, this is super cruel, but are you able to talk without your slides? I mean, that's a really mean thing for me to say, but do you think that you might be able to get going without
Yes,
slides?
I can look at them on my screen.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Maybe if you start off, and if we can try and get the slides up, we will. And if we can't, we will absolutely share them with everyone afterwards. It's really, yeah, I'm definitely wedded to my slides. So when they're not there, but if you can still see them, it might be okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna proceed. I feel like I might need to share the sound as well. Someone just said just try to do that one. Okay, don't worry.
Okay, Wonu, we can hear you and we can see your slides, so it's all good. Okay.
Oh, okay, brilliant. Okay, so I'm not going to introduce myself again because that would take up some of the time that I've lost. But I'm just going to start off by saying, just in terms of starting off our work, we were really interested in laying out our aims as a school. We started this work I think conversations in the English department started a lot earlier, just because of the kind of text that we have to encounter. And I think English is a subject where you speak about a number of topics, sometimes quite difficult topics. That's one of the reasons I love teaching English, but it means that we sometimes have the privilege of having some of these more difficult conversations in class, whereas actually there are a number of areas across the curriculum that don't necessarily have that privilege of being able to talk about identity in the same way that we do. So it was really important for us to establish with staff that this is one about overturning forms of racialized disadvantage in our teaching and learning, and considering the ways that our teaching practice, the content of our curriculum delivery could unconsciously discriminate against particular cohorts of students, and then also to interrogate our practices and transform them where necessary. And I think that word interrogate is really important, because it's not necessarily being super trying to come from a critical standpoint, but it's actually to say, you know, if we pick this apart, is it fit for service? Is it fit for purpose? And if we're trying to ensure that our curriculum is accessible, challenging, and also equitable for all students, can we honestly stand by our curriculum and say that it's doing that? So once we established that, we had a whole school CPD in the summer of 2020 for all staff, and this was slightly difficult because as you all know, this was during lockdown, and that meant unfortunately we had to do this over Zoom. But it was really important for us to kind of galvanize ourselves at that time and start to introduce these conversations, to really start thinking about the fact that this is not just about transforming our curriculum, but also transforming our approach to curriculum and our school culture. So a significant part of our work actually was about understanding our school context, then our local context, and then our national context. So our school context, we are a Catholic school, and we are a school that teach boys from 11 to 16, and then we have a mixed sixth form. While our secondary school, I'd say, is majoritarily African and Caribbean, our sixth form is very different actually, and I'd say there's a lot more, we have a higher proportion of Asian students, and that is more representative probably of our local context being in Newham. So it was quite important for us to have those conversations about what that means, not only for our students, but also for our staff. And I've just got an example of one of the things we did with staff, which was kind of asking them if they were aware of the makeup of our staff body and then our student body. We also wanted to raise attention, as some people have actually mentioned in the Q&A, about the lack of representation in teaching, full stop, in terms of teachers from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background. And it was really important for us to also consider that as our staff body. Now, we're in quite a unique position, because I'd say our staff body is actually quite representative of our student body, but we know that that's not necessarily a reason to kind of rest on your laurels or assume that you're definitely providing the best type of curriculum for your students. The next thing we did was also introduce some key concepts. And this was quite important, just to be really aware that you have staff from a wide-ranging background, wide-ranging experiences, and for us to agree upon these definitions and say ultimately we will be using these definitions quite often. So if we're using them, this is the point or the standpoint that we're working from. And I think this was really helpful in one, saying this is kind of a space to learn. It's a space for us to address some of our own biases, think about where they might have come from, think about whether, you know, because of the particular group we belong to, whether we are recipients of privilege, or sometimes actually we don't have certain privileges, and then also understand how that might impact our students. And then we kind of started our journey. So this is a kind of a timeline of our journey so far. So like I said, we started our conversations in June of 2020. We then, the next year, we unfortunately had to kind of delay some of our plans in terms of whole school, because we were met with the recovery curriculum and words like terms like catch up, and we were very focused on actually kind of establishing our back to basics for our students, and them actually understanding what it's like to be back in school in a, I'd say, normal, but nothing has been normal about the last 2 years, but somewhat normal school day. And then myself and my colleague Sarah, we then started our work on diversity in the curriculum, and we started a working party. We hosted a good practice briefing for all staff, and we were also given the opportunity, myself and Michelle Roddy, to contribute to Anna Freud's podcast series entitled Racism and Mental Health for Education and Professionals, which was an absolutely amazing experience. So again, I'm very thankful to have been asked to contribute. I then was given the opportunity to contribute to Anna Freud's framework, which is hopefully helping to assist schools who are trying to undertake the same work. And Sarah and I then looked at establishing our CPD, our whole school CPD, establishing our working party, running sessions on a fortnightly basis, encouraging staff to start having pupil conversations that would lead to schemes of work being reviewed, and then ultimately having a scheme of work reviewed, and then the teaching and learning that happens in that term being reviewed, and the conversation taking place about how this would then be built into whole school policy. So this is probably explained in a lot more detail in the framework that I created for for Anna Freud. But and I'm happy if anybody wants to email me after to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of exactly what we did. But it was really important that, one, the pupils were at the centre of this conversation. We unlike maybe some schools, didn't have an experience of many accusations or of overt racism. And I think because of that, it can be very easy to almost have an attitude of complacency, kind of saying, well, you know, that kind of stuff doesn't happen here, or students don't feel like that here. But actually, it's important to assume that it can happen here, it could happen here, and if you start with that assumption, it hopefully will energize you to make sure that you are being really purposeful and intentional when you are starting this work. It was also really important to have conversations with the pupils about how they actually were experiencing the curriculum. And we hosted pupil conversations led by curriculum leaders and assistant curriculum leaders, or representative from those subjects, with groups of students across the school and across different subjects. And that was really, really interesting. If I just give some anecdotal evidence from our own department, we had conversations with our sixth form students, and we've done quite a lot of work to kind of look at our curriculum, to kind of change it to make it slightly more diverse and more representative of the student body we had, but also not compromising on how challenging we wanted our curriculum to be. And a group of our female Asian students in year 12 and year 13 actually said, you know, while we feel like the curriculum is diverse, we don't see ourselves in the curriculum. And for me as a head of department, that was a real learning curve, to actually think, where are the opportunities to make sure that these students also see themselves represented in literature. And it made me think, where have they had any opportunity to see themselves in novels, to see themselves in texts. And now we're actually doing work to look at where we can actually increase that diversity. And also it's a great CPD for us, you know, to expand our reading, to read beyond maybe some of the literature we're more familiar with, and actually challenge ourselves to explore beyond what we've already known. And many of the people that have taken part in the working party have said that that's been the particularly interesting thing, is actually developing their curriculum knowledge, developing their subject knowledge, and I'm hoping it will again lead to even more effective change in curriculum. So I've got a case study from my department, and this is kind of a timeline of some of the things that we've done in the last few years. Again, quite brief, but first thing was in 2017. We decided that we were going to look at Langston Hughes poetry, and we thought it would be a really good really good way to explore the Black experience in 1920s and 1930s America. Then in 2018, we introduced Fences onto the Key Stage 5 coursework, or the non-assessed unit, and we wanted to create opportunities to look at dialect, language and culture. And that's why it's actually quite interesting, the conversations that are coming up about the N-word, because this was something that we also looked at in these conversations, because the N-word is used frequently in that text. We then moved on and we started to look at our Key Stage 3 curriculum, and we decided that we were doing a novel called My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece, but we decided that we felt the language was not challenging enough for year 7 students, especially learning that a lot of our students were coming in from Key Stage 2 having looked at this text already. We then made another decision to change a novel, The Outsiders, to Coram Boy, and we wanted again to look at race, look at different experiences of people in society, but look at it from a British perspective, which we felt was not always done. And then we did some work on our Age of Imperialism unit, which is the current unit that we have in year 9, and we're still kind of looking at, in that unit, we look at race, we look at religion and science, we look at gender. So again, trying to use that as kind of a way to explore the different facets of identity. And it also meant that in 2020, again, of course, with the incident with George Floyd, and kind of conversations around race relations being brought to the forefront, not just across the pond, but also here in the UK, we created a navigating derogatory language policy. I know there's been, if there are any English teachers on the course, on the call, then they possibly would have studied of mice and men at some point, and we actually used to have of mice and men in our key stage 3 curriculum. We made the decision 2 years ago to phase it out and take it off of our key stage 3 curriculum, and actually it was around the use of the N word. We felt that we could no longer justify having, especially in a school where we have so many black boys. We were kind of stumped to why we would continue to read a novel where that word is used in such a derogatory way, and we thought, are there other ways in the curriculum or other places where we could have that conversation around language, pejorative terms? And we felt like, actually, while that is such a rich text and there's loads of love about it, there were other opportunities for us to do that. So in the last year, or this academic year, we've kind of been looking for a new Year 9 text. Our current contenders are The Giver and The Dark Lady, which is actually by Carla, who's already been mentioned this evening. And our Diversity in Curriculum Working Party started, and now we're looking at changes to our non-examined assessment for Key Stage 5. So we're actually thinking about how we can produce a more diverse collection of poetry to increase autonomy for our Key Stage 5 students, and they decide what poem they're going to analyse. And we've just found our pupil conversations have been incredibly enriching, incredibly informative, and it's been pleasing to see the students do feel like our curriculum is diverse, but also very interesting to see how they feel it could be improved. And that probably would be the best advice I'd offer, is just make sure you're centering the students, because you are ultimately doing this for them. You're doing it so that they have a more enriching experience in your school, and centering them in the conversation is not only insightful, but incredibly powerful when embarking on any change. So very quickly, because I'm aware I'm probably out of time. The last thing I just put on is just some useful resources. As a Catholic school, we were very interested in considering what this means in our Catholic context, and as a faith school and a faith community. So we did a lot of work of kind of looking at what this should mean as a Catholic school, how this should align with our virtues in terms of producing a curriculum that promotes equity and is anti-racist. And also just bearing in mind that you will have a lot of teachers that will feel nervous about embarking on this work. And I think a couple of things have come up about confidence and courage. And it does take a lot of courage to start that work. There sometimes is resistance, and some of that resistance is oftentimes because people see the differences but are quite afraid of what it means to deal with a variation. And that's why I just like to end on James Berry's poem, What Do We Do with a Variation, which I think really challenged, it kind of literally is a great reflection of how we thought about challenging some of the variations we do see. While we didn't necessarily feel like, oh, this has been a massive issue for our school, we realized that it should be something that we are talking about because of the unique context of our school as well. So I think I'll probably end it there. And I guess after this session, we'll be taking questions. So thank you, Jaime.
Wonu, thank you, and thank you for remaining so calm when the sound went down and the slides were not there. But it was really worth waiting and having those slides. Thank you. So many questions coming in, and I want to cover as many as we can in the next 20 minutes. Roseanne and Stuart, can I ask you to come back on the screen? Wonu, I might just pick up a few sort of practical ones that have come through already. I think there's probably quite a lot of English teachers on the call. Wonu, just a really practical question. What exam board are you using?
So for GCSE, we use AQA. For A-level, we use OCR.
Thank you. And I think you answered some of this, but lots of discussion around language and how we teach it. And so, for example, you were really clear that your school made the decision to remove of mice and men. Some teachers saying that, they think that, could we still keep those books on in terms of teaching? So, for example, someone talks about the text To Kill a Mockingbird as being a very powerful text. What's your opinion, Wonu, on how we use those texts, or is your choice to remove them completely from the curriculum?
I think it is quite difficult, and I think someone has asked the question, which is related to kind of the fact that language is so is so important, particularly in a subject like history, and obviously in a subject like English. We struggled over this for a number of years. The reason we decided to remove it was also because of the reaction from students, and we had a number of students who, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, had said, why is this still on the curriculum? And it got to a point where, yes, I could say it's important because actually it's a really fantastic text which reflects a time in history. You know, this is actually what was happening. But I think their concern was that the Black character in the text is not affirmed in any way. In fact, is actually just is a victim of prejudice, and also is not. In some ways, yes, you see there's some dimension to character, but they just struggled to see why we couldn't read something else which explored similar themes, but where the language didn't affect them in this way. And it's funny because I've taught this text in this school for 10 years, so this will be the last year we're teaching it. It's probably still a text that we might read and discuss, but I haven't ever seen such a strong reaction from students. And if I could say I could still explore the exact same themes with students, still use a text that is rich in language, still explore maybe from a historical context side, similar important events, then why would we not make that decision? And I think that's what it boiled down to for us. And it was also important for us not to react when many teachers were, especially in edgy Twitter, loads of teachers were saying, oh, we're getting rid of mice men, we're getting rid of mice men. And I've always been like, you don't think about the whole context, but you've got to think about what's happening in your school. And at that time, I think it was the right decision for us and our students. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
It does. Thank you very much. Stuart, as a teacher, I just wanted to bring you in there. Do you have any thoughts about teaching these texts?
Yeah, no, I'd go back to sort of the premise of those other words that have connotations with other ethnic minorities and groups. Where are they in text? Another community that's been really trying to change language and change mindset is the traveller community, and how they're depicted and seen in books and literature as well, which then reinforces people's contexts and mindsets around that marginalised group. So I'm glad to hear some schools are taking it out, but again, it's for me, it's why do we need it? What context is it bringing? How's it bringing the richness to the character? Why does it need to be there? It doesn't need to be there, in my opinion. Let's eliminate the word. Let's give our young kids now a better understanding of the historical facts around that word. Because again, when you know where it's come from and understand that the connotations behind it, how people fought not to be called that word, somehow now we've reclaimed the words. It doesn't sit well with me. It really doesn't.
Thank you. And there's quite a few questions coming up in the chat about how you might have those conversations with young people in your class. Or there was I think a teacher said that some of her college students were making music using that word. So I'm hoping that answers some questions about how you might want to have that conversation with your young people, how you might want to explore it with them a little bit. Wonu, lots of questions for you, because it was really inspiring what you talked about. So you talked about having a working party. Can you just talk about, were there challenges? Was it hard to recruit to that? Was it difficult? Some people have said they've tried to do that, couldn't get parents or other members of staff on board. And also a really practical question. We all know how incredibly busy it is being a teacher. How are you finding time? Do you have special allotted time? How do you carve out time to do this really systemic changing work?
So just in terms of the working party, when we delivered the CPD in June 2020, we sent out a survey after with some questions about the content that was shared, and then asked for interest. So said, we're starting a working party. We would really like for there to be a representative from every curriculum area, and then asked for people to put their names forward. We contacted those people and then said for the first session, everyone is still invited. So it wasn't compulsory for people to come, but we wanted to make it seem, if you haven't signed up, that's fine. You might just want to come to the first session and see what it's going to be about, but also made it really clear that this change will be happening. And not change, but actually review and reflection, because that's ultimately what it is. It's reflecting upon your practices, reflecting upon your curriculum, and then seeing if this is the end goal, is this fit for purpose? So when it was very clear that actually every department is going to be undergoing this reflection and reviewing their curriculum, like you do at the end of every year, this is just something you're also going to be reviewing. It made it a lot easier to recruit. And actually, my deputy head, who's my line manager, Anya Burke, who's fantastic, she was like, you should push to have a representative from every department. So thankfully, we have, in some departments, we have 3 people who come. In some departments, it's just 1 because of the size. We have some departments that have buddied up, and obviously that work looks very different. So for our science department, a lot of their work has been about their displays and the practitioners there and the scientists they're looking at. For history, it's been about actually thinking, okay, what periods, what lens are we always teaching from? Is it always kind of a Eurocentric lens? Are we thinking about what can we have more conversations about the victors and the victims? And that's been really interesting. Geography as well. So they've done a lot of work with the history department about kind of reviewing some of their schemes. I think the Key Stage 3 is actually where you can do the most work, which is actually, I think Key Stage 3 is the most important part of the secondary school curriculum, because you're laying the foundation, but that's where you get to do the most work, because you're not bound by your exams and coursework and deadlines in the same way you are at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5. So a lot of that work has definitely been happening right now in Key Stage 3. So that's how we recruited for the working party, and then made it very clear what the end goal was, what we wanted to produce, and the fact that this wasn't just work to be done in 1 year, but this would be an ongoing work, and explain that, the road is hard, it's going to be a really difficult road, but it doesn't mean that because a journey is going to be difficult, we don't start the journey. And I think that has that's been something that's probably been quite reassuring for staff, the fact that we're all doing it together. So yeah, I can't remember what the second question is.
No, well, that was really informative, thank you. And just in terms of bringing parents and carers on the journey, did you involve them in any way?
So for parents, in terms of, I think Roseanne mentioned kind of looking at your safeguarding policies and your behaviour policy, and a lot of our looking at our behaviour policy has come under that. So we've recently been kind of reviewing our policy, our sexual harassment policy for students and for staff, because of the peer-on-peer abuse. That has been a national issue. So we were communicating that through the changes in our behaviour policy in particular, and about the kind of language that will be tolerated and won't be tolerated. And I think that has helped to send the message home to parents about the kind of language, the kind of ideas that you are discussing at home. If that is, like Stuart said, if that's coming out in something a student says, then that is going to ultimately go back to the parents and say, okay, what's happening here? Are you surprised by this language? Is it something that's been mentioned at home? So a lot of that has come through kind of our policies that are slightly away from curriculum.
Thank you. Roseanne, I've got a question for you, which is, I think a few people have asked a similar kind of question. How do you make that sort of first leap to decide that as a school you're going to be anti-racist? How do you bring people along with you, apart from the community, from school leaders who might feel resistance? How are you going to foster that sense of trust? And talk a little bit more about that idea of having safe spaces in schools and building trust, while also keeping an opportunity for curiosity.
I was thinking about the inclusion department, where the mantra is, my understanding, about being inclusive, where you're there to support students, children across all levels, across the schools, from all different races and culture, and just having some sort of sensitivity to difference, and perhaps being conscious of your language. I know one head has said that when you look at race, it's exhausting, but there are sort of leadership, identity and race workshops that teachers can go on, which can then start to infiltrate. And I think about subculture, that if you start sometimes, like I think about hair, like West Indians used to cornrow their hair. as subculture, and then you've got David Beckham cornrowing his hair in football, and then it becomes mainstream and everybody cornrows their hair. And sometimes you have to start from the bottom up rather than top down, but it's not easy. And it's about fostering relationships with parents, and then making that feel comfortable, and also in maybe tutor times, having some special time where you can talk about topical issues, because everybody hears the news, everybody is exposed to what's going on in the world, and perhaps inviting students to share their views and their curiosity about things, but certainly creating a culture. You do need the authority from above, because Wonu's in a position of authority. I wondered how easy it would have been if you just had a regular English teacher wanting to change the curriculum. How easy would it have been if the deputy and you were not particularly keen on doing that, maybe rocking the boat? I think it takes courage, Jaime, to really explore and want to change. And it's particularly where somebody had a question in there where the minorities are the minority in a particularly dominantly white school. You'd still be interested in difference. Everybody must still know what's going on in the news. The death of George Floyd must have generated a hell of a lot of conversation in all corridors, in all walks of life. And it was whether the school was sensitive enough to capture that. So it's not easy, and it takes courage. It's just one little example. A colleague came from a systemic background, and always in systemic therapy, you look at race, you look at all the diversity, you look at difference, you look at gender, you look at religion, you look at everything. Psychoanalytic presentation of a case is always about the problem, and any identifying markers that sets that person within their context is ignored. And that person had to keep persevering and persevering and persevering until other people started to appreciate the variety the difference brought. But you have to make a commitment, and it's not easy, as some of the teachers have commented to Wonu.
Thanks, Roseanne. And Stuart, I'd be interested in your perspective, because it isn't easy. We've just heard from Wonu and Roseanne, it's hard and it's a long journey. What change are you seeing in schools? Are you seeing a lot of resistance, or what's your experience?
So again, I definitely would say it's upsetting to hear that it's not coming from the top, because surely as a head teacher, as a leader, you're responsible for all child's development in all facets of that as well. So it's a bit disheartening to hear that. But again, in the work that I've been doing, I remember when I first started this journey, I was escorted off of school premises because of the mantra and the sort of the notion of what I was saying. And I always go with the point of view, I'm not trying to alienate no one. This is a journey. I always say, this is not my problem. I don't have a problem with race. I don't. Me. This is everyone else's perception of me, which I'm trying to influence and change. And so therefore, I know for a fact that I cannot alienate anyone. I don't walk around wagging my finger and saying, all you people, your fault. Because again, no one living present now was there 300 years ago. So therefore, all we can do now, even if you've got hereditary, forefathers, slave, all you can do now is with that knowledge, what are you going to do with it? Going back to what I said again about the notion of education, of bettering yourself. We used to send children up chimneys. Haven't we got a little bit better and understand now that was a bit wrong? We don't do that anymore. So it's about as we move through for this, that we, again, being comfortable in the uncomfortableness of knowing that our forefathers before us didn't do things quite right. But you know what? We can make sure that our children's life are so much more better and enriched. And because again, that's what it brings as well. That's the infuriating part of all this. It's the other facets of why do we want to be around everyone that's always like us? Because we don't. We're interested in that thing that makes someone else tick a little bit. That curiosity of life is something that should be encouraged to explore and develop and understand and share, because sometimes, a lot of the time as well, that those things that you think are different, there's so much similarity in there anyway. So that's super important as well for me. So yeah, it's important for us to continue this conversation, for all of us to take an active part in no matter where we sit on the rung of life, and we continue to keep talking about it. That's what we need to keep doing.
You know, I kind of agree with you, Stuart, in the sense that it's uncomfortable, and we have to acknowledge that change isn't easy, and it is uncomfortable, and we have to be prepared to be uncomfortable. And I think about a head where one of my colleagues who was Asian commented to the head, all the referrals are black. Can we maybe, is it unconscious racism? All the teachers are referring all the black kids out of there. Could we possibly talk about it? No, there was no conversation. There was no invitation to be curious. And I thought perhaps the head teacher thought they were being accused of being racist. But it was like, well, it's interesting. They're all from different year groups, but every single one of them to the service is black. What could be going on? Can we have a conversation? Can we be curious? It got completely shut down. And I think sometimes the discussions around race is overwhelming and it's frightening, because you don't want to be accused of being racist. You may not be conscious that there's a bias that maybe your staff are all leaning towards, but it's like a big black hole. You don't know where you're going to fall, where you're going to land. And it does take a lot of courage. And I think all the resources that's taken place, I imagine it's been a lot of energy, a lot of hard work, but courage is what we need. Oh, shut up now.
Thanks, Roseanne. So I just want to ask you, Roseanne, actually, and others, about experiences around intersectional approaches to anti-racism. So thinking about Black young people who are also trans, Black young people who are also Muslim. Has anyone got any thoughts about how we might advise approaching that? Is that a different approach? Is it something that requires a different skill set? Stuart?
It's an approach that just, again, it goes back to that empathy thing, doesn't it? And that understanding of others. We're living in a world where acceptance and your authentic self is what we all strive to be accepted as, in some sort of guise. And we all have to, you know, I'd say to someone said the other day about their own uncomfortable bias towards things and previous understandings of things. You have to change that and to be open to be changed. And again, that's that whole thing about, you know, every day can be a learning day for you to get better as a human being, for me. And there were things, you know, that I believed in my younger self that I don't believe now, you know. So it's about being open to listening, hearing whatever the young person needs. There's some really great work going in Wales around sort of the mental health service and the offering and providing that they're going out there where it's bespoke to whatever that young person wants. We just need to get back to listening and hearing what the young people are saying and then being there to help and support them. We are supposed to be like scaffolding, aren't we, around these young people? But we're not forcing them in any which way direction that we believe is the right way. As they grow, we grow around them.
Wonu, Roseanne, anything to add in relation to intersectionality?
Wonu.
I was just going to say, just in terms of intersectionality, that's actually something that we did look at originally, especially having such a diverse student body, but actually addressing some of the commonly held stereotypes about the students that we have. Like Roseanne was saying, it's very scary. And I think teachers were scared to actually say, oh, I have, or this is what I think is sometimes thought about these particular pupils. But it was actually important to then have a conversation about, when you meet someone that goes against that grain, then what is your reaction to that student? And how is your response to that student? How is it possibly unconsciously hindering them, or maybe giving them a level of privilege that they actually haven't they haven't deserved, based on maybe the work that they've produced, or the behavior that they've displayed in a class. And I definitely think there does need to be more work around intersectionality and more conversations in schools. You know, especially if you think about the Child Q case, we did have a conversation at school around the fact that it was not just that it was a Black student, she was a Black female student, about the adultification of young Black women. And that's an important conversation to have as well, particularly if you have a context where you do have a high proportion of students who belong to that particular group. So I think it does take the bravery to have the conversation. And also, I've seen a lot of people saying that, you know, they are in a context where they don't necessarily have have the they don't necessarily have the resources, I would definitely encourage people to reach out, talk to other secondary colleagues or primary colleagues, whatever your context, to kind of help you with that work, because sometimes your context is just very different to someone else, and you might say, well, I haven't seen these things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't still important work to reflect on. So yeah, I definitely feel like there's still quite a lot of work to be done on intersectionality, and we definitely discovered that with the feedback from our female Asian students when they said, oh, we don't see ourselves in the curriculum, or sometimes we feel teachers respond to us in this way, and when we're like this, they're a bit surprised because they have their own preconceived notions of what we should be like. So yeah, I definitely feel like there does need to be more conversations around that and learning, because you don't know it all. So yeah.
I think sensitivity to language with intersectionalities, particularly with young people in primary schools, where, you know, if it was, you know, some teachers would say young Sudanese little person definitely has very flamboyant behavior mannerisms, you know, and they're Muslim and it's kind of haram to even go there. So you have to be really mindful about your language. You've got to be sensitive not to label, stigmatize, and also be aware of how the parents' belief system around homosexuality, if that young person has a propensity to, you know, to become gay or trans or non-binary. It's very delicate arena to navigate, and it feels quite young in terms of faith. It's not, as you're saying, there's lots of conversations, and I think sometimes social care and their diverse programs may have some support that schools could tap into, where they offer workshops. There may be some ways to sort of hook up together and think about language and different resources to sort of, as you say, think outside the box.
Roseanne, thank you. I'm going to have to end this. I can't quite believe that it's 6 o'clock. That just disappeared. There are so many more questions. We could have gone on talking for another few hours, probably all night. And I've just found this incredibly interesting, thought-provoking. I just want to say a massive thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Stuart, thank you to Roseanne, and thank you to Wonu. It's been so interesting to hear from all of you, and I think we've all been really inspired and have all taken home lots of different practical ideas and things that we want to see that will be different. Also, thank you to the audience. Thank you for everyone that joined us. It's hard to join an online seminar after a long day at work. So thank you for joining and bearing with us and bearing with all of our technical problems. And thank you for participating as much as you can in a closed online virtual seminar. But thank you for all of your questions. And I did my best to ask as many as I could, but I acknowledge there were so many. But thank you for attending. I hope it's given you something useful to think about and to take back to your school or your education setting tomorrow. I'll shortly close the seminar, but just to say, if you're interested in finding out about any more of our seminars or joining us again, please do sign up to Schools in Mind. All of the resources that we've talked about this evening are free to access. They're all on our web pages. You can download them, and we'll share all of the slides from Wonu, Stuart and Roseanne within the next 10 days. When I close the seminar, you'll be redirected to a feedback form. If you could take a couple of minutes to fill it out, it'd just be fantastic. It just tells us a little bit more about what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy, what you'd like to see in the future. And we just really want to make sure that we're meeting people's needs. So thank you very much for joining us. Sorry that I've gone a couple of minutes over time, but thank you again to the audience and to the speakers, and have a really good evening. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.